Okay, so here are my top 3 science, wildlife, and environmental news stories from this past week. And the first story is about bunnies being indicator species in swamps. How healthy is this swamp I'm in? Well, indicator species are organisms that can tell you just how healthy an ecosystem is. Metrics like their presence, absence, population density, and even behavior let scientists know the environmental conditions that may be difficult to determine otherwise. Now, floodplains in the southeastern US, like this one behind me, have a very good indicator species on their hands: the swamp rabbit. New research shows that these swamp rabbits that live mainly around the Mississippi River Basin highly correlate with amphibian and wetland bird species richness. Vital plant components that support swamp rabbits include plant complexity, forest density, and understory vegetation. Essentially, the healthier a floodplain bottomland forest is, the more rabbits it can support. That's why researchers saw more swamp rabbit poop in the most biodiverse and pristine habitats. Lots of rabbit activity in healthy swamps. Who knew rabbits could tell us so much? If you see the Easter Bunny this year, you might just be in a beautiful swamp. Alright, that was pretty interesting. So next up is a news story about oil wells that I found to be pretty fascinating. Thousands of these oil rigs stand motionless in the Gulf of Mexico/America, and that's because they aren't even operating. So I wasn't kidding when I said motionless. These are called idle wells. They are not currently extracting oil from the sea floor, but they also aren't permanently sealed off either. They basically sit in limbo, possibly to be used once again, but most likely not. In fact, over 75% of them are overdue for decommission. And you might think an idle well is neutral towards the environment, right? But like I said, they aren't sealed off, which normally means plugging the tapped oil deposit with concrete to prevent oil escape. Unchecked and forgotten idle wells start to corrode and degrade over time in the salty sea, resulting in chronic oil leakage. For example, in April of last year, idle well number 59, which was 82 years old, broke loose and spewed tens of thousands of gallons of pollutants into Louisiana state waters and wetlands. These abandoned ghost wells are in deep water and expensive to inspect, so decades can go by without ever checking on them. Even worse, if a company that owns an idle well goes bankrupt, then the idle well turns into an orphan well. That means the well gets stranded with no responsible party. Ultimately, to fix that problem falls onto taxpayers. And guess what? We just keep on chugging along by issuing more drilling permits to companies that can't even clean up their own previous messes. Seems like something is just very, very wrong here, and I hope you agree. Okay, and this final story is about bottled water companies here in Florida. People are pretty livid, and that's because bottled water companies in Florida pump out millions of gallons of fresh spring water every single day. These companies, like Zephyrhills, pay for cheap permits that allow them to tap into the Floridian aquifer. This massive underground water source is what feeds the springs us Floridians love to visit. Funneling water to these factories reduces spring flow rates, which can result in warmer water, more stagnation, and worse ecosystem health overall. This also makes the rivers that flow from spring heads vulnerable to algae blooms that can smother vegetation like eelgrass. This impacts a lot of fish, manatees, and invertebrates. The main hotspot for bottled water is the Santa Fe River system, which includes Ginnie Springs, where large-scale groundwater pumping has been heavily debated. Okay, now with that all being said, these bottled water companies unfortunately really aren't even the main culprits here. In fact, they are more of a symbolic issue when compared to the real problem, and that prize goes to agricultural usage, which sucks the springs dry at magnitudes much higher than bottled water companies. But that rain is going to have to be for another video, unfortunately. So in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this slippery video. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video that will hopefully keep you in the loop with what's going on. And I'll be posting more interesting news stories like this in the future. So feel free to follow our nonprofit Nightwalkers by subscribing to this channel. Peace out.